I'm quite happy to watch Bake Off.
No, really? Okay. Right, Charlie.
Oh, hello.
So, I've spent a lot of time, because I'm new to this Black Mirror thing, right? And my daughter said, I can't believe you've not watched them. So I've been gorging, right?
Right. I think that's the phrase. Yep.
Including up to USS Callister.
Mm-hmm.
Yet to be seen by the public.
Yet to be seen by the public, part of the new season.
Which I watched at 6 o'clock this morning.
Right.
And I want to ask, how on earth do you come up with a line like, stealing my pussy is a red fucking line?
Well,
I mean, what sort of imagination is that?
Well, within the context in which that appears, it's a perfectly reasonable statement.
But how does your mind get to that, where you get people who don't have genitals?
Which I would add is somewhat of a spoiler, although hopefully an intriguing.
Sorry,
I don't know. No, it's not really.
It's intriguing.
It's certainly an intriguing premise. I think really where what happens is when we're coming up with ideas for the show, it's usually born of just a conversation during which something will occur to me that makes me laugh, usually in a darkly humorous way.
Right.
Often something terrible. It's like, wouldn't it be awful, if such and such a thing happened? And then the story.
If we had no genitals.
If we had no genitals, that would be
awful.
It would be impractical.
Yeah.
Wouldn't it? It would be impractical. It would be frustrating.
So winding back, where did the very first idea come to do that particular film? Which is quite different to a lot of the other stuff you've done.
To do USS Callister?
Yeah.
Well, we always do, because each season of Black Mirror, we, in a rather somewhat pretentious way, like to imagine that we're curating a little film festival, if you see what I mean. Because each one has to be different and fairly idiosyncratic. Yeah. We've discovered that it's best to sort of imagine that we're doing different genre pieces and approach it like that. And so
what's the genre piece of that?
Well, genuinely, we thought, we haven't done a big space epic. We're a sort of sci-fi show of a sort, but we've never done space exploration. So how would we do that was kind of what we thought. That's where we approached it from.
And in terms of what's happening in the world technologically, is it sort of looking at this whole thing of weird people in their bedrooms who are coding and gaming and trying to control other people's lives? I'm not spoiling.
But you called them weird people in their bedrooms, not me.
Okay. But are there weird people in their bedrooms?
Oh, are there weird people? Yeah, there are. There are weird people.
And is Robert Daly a bit of a weird person in his bedroom, but just a genius at what he does?
In that particular story, it's sort of really, it becomes a story about a tyrant, and it's about somebody wielding immense power, basically. And quite often in our stories generally, what we do is we explore what happens when a normal, flawed human being is given some sort of immense power by technology. When I say that's what we explore in the stories, that's not consciously what we sit down and think when we're sort of coming up with story ideas.
Is that the defining theme, do you think?
Often, because I think that basically pretty much the show is, it's clearly inspired by shows like The Twilight Zone or Tales of the Unexpected, but where they would use the supernatural to make something unusual happen, we use technology, and usually what it's doing is it's almost like somebody has discovered a superpower in some ways. So we've got episodes where you can rewind and replay your memories, which is almost like a supernatural power. Or we've got stories in which technology is kind of imposing power on everybody else. So it's created a sort of fairly warped but logical system, and people are trying to struggle with the ramifications of it. So that's generally.
As soon as you talk about the tyrant thing, and a lot of the stuff that you do is not about social media, it's just about this incredible technological advance that's taking place. when you look at sort of Putin getting involved in the American elections in the way that he did, and the way the Americans seem not to care, what thought does that put in your head?
Well, it's an interesting one in that it's certainly something as we go forward to do more. It's not something that we address in season 4 because at the time that was being written, all of this stuff was yet to sort of play out.
Yeah.
It is strange. I mean, I've often felt that the world of sort of social media and the world of the internet is kind of like a weird dreamscape that we're all involved in. It's like when you're even just physically, and when you're sort of looking at your phone, you slip into a little coma, and out of it, it's like you sort of fall asleep and then you snap out of it and you're back in the real world. The world that's in there, it doesn't feel entirely real. And when you meet people who you've interacted with on social media, they're not like they are on social media. And it feels like that sort of weird and now slightly sinister dream world is creeping more and more into the real world. When you look at something like the American election and all that stuff that surrounded that, or you look at the kind of rhetoric that's floating around here at the moment online, it's very frightening, and yet it doesn't feel like it's coming from an authentic place. So the fact that that's now being revealed to be more and more feels like it's orchestrated by sort of bot armies, sort of tweeting out seeding hashtags to influence opinion, is both, in some ways, I find sinister and also weirdly reassuring to think, is that something we're going to snap out of? Is that a
But what if it's not? And what if it goes to the next stage and the next stage and the next stage? Because what it seems to me a lot of your stuff is about is that we don't really know what's happening to our thoughts. We don't really know the impact of all this stuff.
That's definitely something I worry about. Yeah. I mean, I can really worry a lot about stuff. I'm often asked, are you anti-technology? Yeah. Are you anti-progress? And I'm definitely not, because you couldn't do this show if you were.
But are you scared about the ramifications?
I'm scared of everything. So that's I basically am a really anxious worrier. I would worry about the downside of almost anything.
Right.
And so I think that I can very quickly go from, if I'm watching the news, I very quickly go to a place where I'm quite worried about. The only thing that stops me being the sort of person who's a doomsday prepper is I'm lazy as well.
Right. So for example, if you watch Trump and Kim Jong-un, you think there'll be a nuclear war?
Weirdly, I don't.
Climate change, you think the planet will get destroyed eventually?
You see, oddly, things like that, where as soon as a lot of people are worried about it, I sort of ease off a bit.
Okay.
I sort of try and think...
Because you think we'll work it out?
I at least hope that we'll try.
Right.
Like when it comes to, say, Trump and Kim Jong-un, you think, it'd be bloody annoying for the world to destroy itself over that when we can see that coming. And I worry more about an accidental nuclear exchange happening because of 99 red balloons fly by and there's an accidental sort of launch. That worries me more because it feels like that would be more unexpected in a way. But I can very quickly go to a place of worrying about society spiralling out of control and before you know it.
Do you think this whole sort of technological advance is helping society to spiral out of control? Do you feel it's more out of control than it was?
I think that it feels more out of control than it was, certainly. I think it's not... Yes, but I think that what's happened is we have developed a new superpower, effectively. We've developed an ability, a new form of communication, which we, almost as a species, are not yet up to speed with.
Right, but a superpower suggests that when you say superpower, I think country, I think state.
Right.
You're saying superpower that we can all possess because we've got a bloody phone.
Well, yeah, I mean, I remember even when this is going back a bit, but when text messages were first a thing,
Amazing.
I remember thinking, that's weird. It felt almost like psychic communication.
Yeah.
It felt like a little secret. It was a new form
Yeah.
of communicating with people that wasn't quite conversation and wasn't quite a phone call, and it immediately developed a new kind of language and a new feel to it. And similarly, I think with
LOL.
social media, exactly. Well, similarly with social media, the fact that the fact that that's a new, it's a disruptive thing. It doesn't have to be a negative thing. I think that at the moment, one of the things that's going on is that we're learning to deal with the ramifications of that, and the next generation is much better at that than,
that's for sure,
than my generation is.
Yeah.
And so I sort of vacillate between being terrified and optimistic.
Where does all this fear come from? And have you always been were you a fearful, anxious child?
Yes, I think certainly I can remember that. I think a lot of it was to do with something that's now in vogue again, which was nuclear paranoia. So I was born in 1971, and I remember very clearly there being a point at which I realised that nuclear weapons were a real thing and were terrifying. My grandparents on my mother's side were both CND supporters. My grandmother was one of the Greenham Common women and went on CND marches. They had all these CND magazines lying around. Sanity, I think it was called, CND magazine. Yeah. There had lots of copies of these lying around in their house. And I remember finding a copy of Sanity, and I must have been really young, and flipping through it and reading an account of like one of the nuclear bombs dropped on Nagasaki or something like that. And it was there was a description of the body of a pregnant woman that was found in a sort of skip full of irradiated water or something like that. And I must have been really young, and I was like, Jesus Christ. And then watching things like Threads, which was on in 1984, I think. There was a QED documentary on what would happen if they dropped if one nuclear bomb was detonated over St Paul's Cathedral. This stuff really went in.
It's still there.
It's still there, and I could not understand why everyone wasn't out in the streets just panicking or screaming all the time. I couldn't understand why everyone was so calm, or why people could care about fucking biscuits and shoes and kitchens when this was hanging over our heads. It didn't add up. It seemed demented. So I think that was, and I think for a lot of people of my generation, that must have been a very profound thing, of profound fear. And I was probably watching things like Threads at probably slightly too young an age to really be able to deal with that. It was extremely unsettling. And
but your kids, right?
Yeah,
they're growing up in an age where you haven't just got the nuclear weapon thing. You've got the climate change. You've got the global terrorism. You've got the economic inequality. We seem to have even more kind of these big existential threats. So are you more scared now than you were when you were a kid?
It depends. There's a weird thing where there's a weird sort of slightly optimistic streak that I think has, since becoming a parent, that something has to sort of start to kick in, otherwise you'd completely give up. So part of me thinks that, I guess part of it is to do with becoming an adult, and you are just a bit more,
you can analyse,
a little more self-sufficient, or I expected to, in the 80s, I expected to die within the next 3 years.
You really felt that?
I really thought it could happen at any time.
Yeah.
Because it looked like it, I'm talking sort of Two Tribes era. That really felt like that was about to happen. So the mere fact that I've existed through a time when it looked like it was definitely going to happen and it didn't.
Yeah, one day it might, one day it might.
Well, no, exactly. Well, that's the 3 a.m. thought.
Yeah.
Do
you sleep well?
No.
And do you dream a lot?
No, I never dream.
You never dream?
No, actually, that's not true. I
thought loads of your ideas for Black Mirror would have come from dreams.
No, I do. I rarely dream. I do dream, but I rarely dream. What was the
last dream you can remember?
Oh God, it will have been really boring. I often have quite boring dreams. I did have a nightmare, not that for the first time in ages.
Right.
I can't remember what it was. I can't remember much about it except that I woke up in the middle of the night really terrified, which I haven't done in quite a while. I'm not a good sleeper. It's only recently I've discovered how to make myself go to sleep.
Pills.
Which is no. It used to be, because I used to take things like Nitol or and it wouldn't, and then you get dependent on it. No, it's it's really boring.
Oh, that band thing.
That headband thing with the sleep phones thing.
Right.
That and an eye mask and something like a podcast or an old Desert Island Discs.
Oh, right.
And something like that. And it needs
very
to be
middle-aged.
Very middle-aged, yeah. Or, well, yeah, sometimes some music, or a stand-up comedy thing. Has to be something that's...
Comedy before you go to sleep?
Well, it has to be something that I'm interested enough in that it's more interesting than just than the circus of paranoid thoughts that will start up.
And how much, when you're having the 3 a.m. can't sleep thing, how much are you getting ideas for the show?
Not really then. No.
Really?
No, the ideas for the show come about usually either in conversation and sometimes when I go running now.
Yeah.
Alien activity a few years ago. And so sometimes then you'll...
Do you take your phone with you?
No, I listen to music.
Right.
And I'll sort of see things, if you see what I mean.
Are you actively looking for ideas when you do that?
Weirdly, it's best if you're not.
Yeah.
You know, so it's usually when you're slightly relaxed, which is why they often come up in conversation.
Yeah.
Because you're focusing on something else, and then you suddenly find yourself saying, "Oh, that'd be great if that happened," and then that's the idea, and you run off and try and write it down.
And when you were a sort of paranoid, anxious, the world's going to end kid, were you always very active and creative in your head? So if you don't dream, do you dream during the day? Are you daydreaming?
Oh yeah, no, I'm a totally daydreamy type. I wanted to be a cartoonist when I was younger.
Yeah,
so
you were for a bit, weren't you?
Well, that was my first sort of, I guess you could class it as a job.
Yeah.
Was drawing cartoons, and I was always interested in drawing comics. I was not a very good cartoonist, but I was interested in drawing comics or computer games, things like that, which I guess really were an escape from the real world. I mean, I did have a fascination with things that were chilling and frightening and disconcerting. I sort of liked things that left me with that sort of horror.
So you like being scared? You like fear?
Yeah, or I think weirdly I found there's something I find, or I certainly found, weirdly comforting about watching something with an incredibly bleak ending, because I was mistrustful of happy endings.
Right. But it looked for a period in your life as though you were going to become almost like a comedian, certainly a satirist. Mm-hmm. Whereas now your stuff is, there's the odd laugh, but it's probably not intentional often.
Sometimes
it's pretty dark.
It's pretty dark, yeah. But usually I'm pissing myself.
Right.
I mean, I suppose, well, at the moment, because I'm doing Black Mirror, that takes up most of my year. Yeah. Basically, so I do an end of year show still for the BBC, and I don't have time at the moment to do like the weekly show we were doing. I still do, like not that long ago, I did a show, co-wrote a show, which was like Airplane, basically, like Naked Gun type humour called Touch of Cloth, and that was it was really useful psychologically to be doing something that silly at the same time as doing something quite bleak.
But it's interesting, you said to me you thought that the Alastair thing was silly. I've
been describing it to people as like, I've been going, it's quite a comedy in your life.
Oh, God.
I mean, there's bits in it that are quite silly. But
if you get into the reality of it...
Oh, it's horrible.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I'm afraid you got me into the reality.
Right, I see. So you were just plain horrified.
I just thought, shit, this could happen.
Well, it's treated seriously within the story, but I suppose I'm a fan of sort of quite grim thought experiments generally. That's the other.
You see, because I've never really watched Star Trek.
Right. No, I'm not a huge...
And so, but I got totally drawn into thinking this is real.
Right.
Even though there are two parallel realities going on.
Yes. Well, that's sort of the point of that story in a way, is the gulf between the fantasy and the reality, and which one is a nightmare.
But it's also the thing about you can create other human beings and clone them and control them and use them and abuse them.
None of which I'm allowed to say
no, but,
in advance.
Nor am I, obviously.
Right, okay.
But so it's like when you go back to the whole thing about the way that tyrants can and do now. I mean, let's talk about Trump a bit. I mean, what do you make of Trump's use of technology and social media?
Well, that I find like Trump is. There's a weird thing where Trump, as soon as Trump was as soon as he was running for the candidates, in the Republican race, I remember thinking he's going to win. He's going to win that, and he'll become president. And then thinking that's a crazy thought. Don't think that. That's just the sort of paranoid thing you think from
right.
Of course,
that was fear.
That was fear. Said he's going to.
But you were right.
Win. People are going to vote for him as he's a vandal. People are going to. There's enough people who want to throw a brick through a window. Yeah. Because that he's going to win, and then it felt to me when I was looking at it felt like there was a grim inevitability to all the stages of it happening. The fact that it started out with everyone on the news going, "Hey, he's such a clown," and then they had to suddenly pull a serious face. Yeah. The way he communicates, there's an odd thing, isn't there, where very quickly, a few years ago, if you told me that the President of the United States would be on Twitter threatening nuclear war with North Korea, I would have shat myself. I would have absolutely been... And it is terrifying if I stop to think about it, but there's something where I think everyone is slightly... He's kind of like a yapping dog in a way, isn't he? It's sort of like... Because weirdly, his words don't carry as much weight because they feel much more... He feels much more...
devalued?
Yeah, he kind of devalues himself in a way, doesn't he? Because he just seems so... You know what he is. You know that's noise and bluster, and you know that they'll come out and kind of say, "Oh, he didn't mean that." It's because he deleted a tweet, didn't he, the other day? Yeah. Like he deleted his prior support for some. It just seems more. There's an element of it that is more ridiculous than it is sinister.
But he is the president.
But he is the president. That's the cognitive dissonance I keep having. Is thinking, what does it mean when he's kind of you can easily dismiss the horror of it. It's also partly, it doesn't help that when you look at that sort of stuff on social media, that a story about, there'll be a breaking news, like, I don't know, BBC breaking news, North Korea fires missile over Japan, and I get a cold lurching immediate feeling, and then the tweet immediately hanging off that, like a turd off a goldfish, is like somebody tweeting an animated GIF of SpongeBob SquarePants, sort of going, "Ooh!" That is not what I foresaw when I had pictured the apocalypse as a kid. I didn't foresee animated reaction GIFs.
But yet you did Waldo.
And yet the Waldo episode. So we often get. People often say that the Waldo episode of Black Mirror kind of predicted Trump in a way, and I guess that was me. I think that was me slightly, and that's an episode that I don't think we really got quite right. What it probably should have been actually was a separate little mini-series or something like that, because we tried to tell quite a complicated story in about 45 minutes, and actually it probably could have benefited from a bit longer, oddly, and it was a slightly different tone from all the others. But that was me struggling with a general sense that things weren't working, and people would say I was doing 10 o'clock live. Yeah. I'd been doing 10 o'clock live around at that time, and sometimes people would say, "You guys should be politicians," and I'd think comedians and really the worst people to be what? And also, what am I doing if I show up and I do one of my wipe shows or something? I'm basically just a 360-degree piss taking.
But Trump is a performer.
Trump is a performer.
Trump's not a politician, he's a performer.
He's a performer, and he's a
Johnson is a performer.
demolition derby car, basically.
Yeah.
He's a performer, and he's a disruptor, and you can see the appeal in. It's the same thing that makes people want to vote for a guy dressed as a banana, or something.
Or the monkey in Hartlepool, or
yes, exactly.
the guy in Iceland, or whatever.
It's completely. It's that.
So Waldo could have won.
Waldo could have won. Weirdly, you see. So when I was writing that, so Waldo comes second.
Yeah.
In the end, he doesn't win because I thought that was too far fetched.
Yeah.
We do then sort of flash forward to we show that it came about because I'd been having years ago. I did a show with Chris Morris and called Nathan Barley, and as part of that, we had this idea. We thought, what if someone came up with an animated politician? There was that band Gorillaz, you know, where they're all cartoon characters, and that was where the idea came from.
Yeah.
What if somebody did an animated MP, and it was like Homer Simpson, something like that? You know he's not real, and that doesn't matter, and that weirdly inoculates him against accusations of being inauthentic, because you're openly...
And that's what everybody says now. Why is Jacob Rees-Mogg being talked about the way that he is? Why has Boris Johnson got as high as he has? Why is Jeremy Corbyn where he is? This thing about authenticity.
Yes, well, it's strange.
Which doesn't have to be real.
It doesn't have to be real, but it has to feel real enough. Like, it was strange, wasn't it, during the recent election, when Paul Nuttall started dressing like Nigel Farage all of a sudden, and he looked
weird.
Just looked ridiculous. It looked like a bad regeneration of Doctor Who or something. It looked like, because normally at least when they regenerate Doctor Who, they give him a whole new outfit. It's like you can't just. David Tennant doesn't just appear in Christopher Eccleston's jacket. It doesn't that's not how it works. So a strong flavour feels authentic. That's partly a phase, isn't it, that we're going through? That's partly a reaction to everyone trying to be Blair, wasn't it? That was partly a reaction to Cameron and Clegg and everyone feeling like politicians starting to feel like a sort of bland neighbour in an episode of Holby City or something. You know, that suddenly everyone...
There's no way to speak of my former boss. But anyway.
Well, I'm saying that everyone was trying to emulate that sort of...
feel.
Well, I would say affable, non-threatening feel was what everyone tried. It felt like politicians became a kind of cookie cutter. Yeah. You could picture what they looked like.
Where would you put your politics?
My politics are broadly I'm clearly more left-leaning than I am right-leaning. I'm weirdly not as political as people think, in that I can get wound up like anyone can, but I'm not like hugely politically active, for instance. I just broadly, and I'm like a lot of people, I'm quite lazy really, I'm focused on working, so I don't sort of...
Where would you put yourself within the British spectrum?
I always vote Labour. Like I just always do.
And where would you, on the Labour spectrum between Blair and Corbyn, where would you put yourself?
I'm probably in between.
Right.
So I've got no place. I'm not even one side of that war. I'm like in the middle of it.
Do you feel homeless politically?
I probably feel less politically homeless now than I did before the election. I was really worried before the election recently. I kind of thought that, where the fuck is Britain going?
You don't feel that now?
I do, but weirdly not in the same way, because I kind of feel like, well, there's clearly, it's not what it doesn't feel like. It doesn't feel like it's becoming necessarily a right-wing dystopia. It might be becoming. I don't know. I don't quite know where it's heading. But I was reassured by the fact that there was a big pushback. It felt against the tone of everything that was going on.
The hard Brexit stuff.
Yeah, it felt like people don't want that. That feels like a clear message. So the frustration. But
do people want
the Corbyn version of it?
Yeah.
I don't think necessarily, no. I think that, I don't really know. I mean, before the Brexit vote, again with the Brexit vote, I sort of thought that Leave's going to win, isn't it? That seemed apparent during the...
Every time you left London.
Every time, well, and you didn't even have to leave London. It was partly Yes, if you left London, definitely.
Yeah.
But also partly, well, there's a strong flavour here. People want a strong flavour at the moment, and there is a very strong flavour coming from the Leave campaign. It's whether you agree with it or not. It's a very clearly defined sort of. Well, it's not. It's a clearly defined mood.
Yeah.
It's a big two fingers up to everything.
Yeah.
And that is it was you could easily latch onto it.
So you voted Labour last time, and I think a lot of people voted Labour thinking, well, I vote Labour, but I don't think Jeremy Corbyn's going to be Prime Minister. Now that people think he might be, does that change the way you think about how you might vote?
I have a very easy vote. Because
of course, you're voting for your sister-in-law.
My sister-in-law. So I have a very easy decision to make there. I don't know, because if you look at the other, you look at the other side and you go, well, why the fucking hell would you want Boris Johnson in charge of things? I mean, he's great on a panel show, but I mean, that was the other thing that the Waldo moment episode was I guess talking about. It was clearly inspired by people like Boris Johnson and Farage, who were becoming stock characters,
celebs on
television, and
as Jacob Rees-Mogg is now.
But I don't think that's going to work.
No.
Is it? Because again, that's becoming boring now.
Right.
That's becoming the thing now that, I would imagine the next wave will be back to the more slightly approachable sort of he's trying too hard, isn't he? Rees-Mogg, he's trying too hard to be or it feels like.
Yeah. And what about Brexit?
He's the Sylvester McCoy of the regenerations that is not,
Do you share my hope that Brexit never happens?
Yeah, I do, because I think it's just because.
Can't you do a Black Mirror Brexit dystopia?
Well, again, actually,
get political.
We do sometimes get political. Sometimes we're overtly political in the show. We're never but then we tend to be. I suppose like the Waldo moment and the national anthem were weirdly sympathetic. They were broadly sympathetic towards politicians, which is the opposite of what I tend to do in anything else I'm doing, where it's all just firing a shit gun over everyone, because that's sort of the job of the show and the persona I adopt.
There's a great moment in the Waldo moment where the Labour candidate that Waldo's character has sex with and what have you, and then he destroys her effectively. And then she sort of, screams at him, at least I'm for something, what are you for? That felt like I just wondered if that was you having a bit of a dialogue with yourself.
That's me having a bit of a go at I suppose it is, it's both it's both kind of at sort of snark for the sake of it. It's kind of attacking that, it's attacking the cynicism. Basically, it's attacking the cynicism, and I suppose it's attacking the anti-political. Let's destroy everything. Desire. It's like, well, what is that really about? Beyond what is that about?
Has getting a politician, as it were, into the family, has that changed your view of politics at all?
Is it actually? I haven't really thought about that too much, except that I can see how bloody. I didn't realise how hard work it is, and how it's unbelievably hard work she has to do. So,
and she believes it, and she cares.
She absolutely believes it, and she every time if she meets anyone, she literally says, if there's ever anything I can do to let me know, if there's ever
and she means
I can
it,
help you. And she means it. So she has to spend loads of time helping people.
Because I agree with you. I was surprised about. I thought the Prime Minister having to do it with the pig. It was a very, very sympathetic portrayal, I think, of him and especially of his wife. And likewise, the politicians in the Waldo moment, even though the Tories are a bit of a knob, it was, I think you were pretty soft with them in a way that in your other life, as you say, you're not.
I think partly because you would expect, because partly it's a contrarian thing, I guess, where that usually in dramas politicians are scheming bastards. Yeah. And usually in things that I do, we're just ripping the piss out of.
But it's everyone. A cliche, isn't it?
Yeah, it is a cliche. But also, with the national anthem, with the Prime Minister and the pig, where that came from two places. Really, the idea for that came from two places. One of them was I was slightly fascinated by things like I'm a Celebrity, where you could have think it was Brian Paddick
Yeah.
one year was running for Mayor of London,
Yeah.
and he didn't win. By the end of the year, he was in the jungle in I'm a Celebrity, drinking a pint of liquidised kangaroo penis next to Timmy Mallet.
Penis?
Liquidised kangaroo penis. Or crocodile penis, an animal's penis, but liquidised. Downing a pint of it against the clock to win some stars for camp next to and I thought, Jesus Christ, that's insane, isn't it? That you can go, that's your trajectory. In 1 year, you go from running for Mayor of London to that.
What about Ed Balls and Strictly? Would you put that in the same category?
It kind of is, but it's less. It's George Galloway on Big Brother. I remember going. I went and saw where I was writing a show about that was a sort of zombie attack on the Big Brother house, and I went down to the Big Brother house and went in the camera run during that series of Celebrity Big Brother and looked through it. It was like peering into a zoo. It was also like being a ghost because they can't see you, so it's really weird. It's like you're invisible. And I became slightly fascinated by George Galloway on that. And I remember when he like licked milk out of a bowl, and everyone said he's completely destroyed. He's finished. He's fucking completely destroyed his own reputation. He was unpleasant to Michael Barrymore within the he mocked him over his sort of drinking and things like that. And he was when he walked out, everyone booed him and screamed at him. And then about a year later, I was in a cab and the radio was on it. It was like George Galloway's phone-in show. Yeah. It was like nothing had happened. And he was using Top Cat as a sort of ironic jingle because and I thought, we're kind of shame-proof. There's a weird thing where you can go on television and pretty much shit into a bowl and no one is then judging you on that a few months later.
So what does that all say about us?
Weirdly, the reason that what Ed Balls goes on Strictly and it becomes a triumph because everyone suddenly
he's a human being.
He's a human being
if he wasn't before.
Not taking himself too seriously, trying his all and trying his best, and good luck to him. You sort of go, well, fine. He's like the guy on the dance floor at a wedding who doesn't care that he looks like a dick. He's just really enjoying it. He's making an effort, and everyone is appreciative of it. It slightly came from that. It also came from that this is specifically the pig episode, was that whole incident that happened when Gordon Brown was caught on a microphone calling Gillian Duffy a bigot. Yeah. And there was just a day, I remember sort of seeing that unfold, there was a day of, it became apparent that it felt like no one was in charge. It felt like suddenly the news, it felt like no one, the news immediately started spiralling back on itself. Yeah. And
I was with him.
Oh, you were with him that day?
Yeah.
It felt like, and I started feeling, the point when he's in the radio studio doing that, I was more just, I felt just human embarrassment and sort of that.
Did you feel sympathy?
Yeah, I did, because I thought, I kind of thought, well, like, I thought you've been caught out. It's something, you've done something clumsy, basically. You've done something clumsy, which you had a reasonable expectation. You've said the wrong thing and you've been caught out by accident. Yeah. And then it's got worse. And
because of the handling and the... Did you feel that was
it was when we went back to apologise.
What did you think about that?
That was the point at which I thought, this has gone crazy now. Because that's surely not, that's not going to work, and the press are all camped out on a doorstep.
But he had to do it. I was with him when he was talking about in himself he had to do that.
He had to do it.
Otherwise he couldn't get up for the rest of the campaign.
Right. The problem was that then looked like he was doing it because the reporters were there. Right. And so it started feeding in on itself.
Yeah,
and it became this weird performance. It felt
bizarrely, the best two speeches he made in the campaign came after that.
Right.
I know this because a lot of people say, Gordon, you can't go back. Mm-hmm. He felt he had to do that himself. It was actually a very, very personal thing. Mm.
When I looked at that, I just felt really sorry for him. Yeah. And I thought that this was...
Do you think the thing with the microphone? Do you think the thing with the microphone was a little bit that thing which sort of comes through in your work, where it's almost like people can see inside your head and see what you're thinking. And that was him exposing a thought that had he known a microphone was there, he would have just held in.
Right, and which arguably he shouldn't, which leads back to that's the why the Farages of the world, people go, well, he's authentic because he says all the stuff that no one actually, like polite society says you shouldn't say. It says the unsayable. Well, it's not that unsayable, is it? Because he keeps fucking saying it.
Yeah.
So I don't know where I'm going with this thought, but as in that's a recurrent theme within the show.
Well, just that that people aren't quite sure who's inside their head, who knows what they're thinking, and
often a lot.
We're sort of losing control of our own thought processes.
That happens a lot within the show. Within the show, and again, it's probably not a conscious thing. Is that I noticed that a lot of the stories hinge on what's authentic and what's real, and an insecurity about what that is. And
here's one with the pig, right? Or the one after the pig, where the woman loses her memory and everybody's following her around filming her.
Oh yeah.
And somebody's trying to kill her.
White Bear, yeah.
Right, that sort of...
And there's a horrible twist.
Yeah, and that felt sort of unreal, but also real. And likewise with the Prime Minister, when the world literally is stopping to see whether he's going to have sex with his pig. Yeah. And it's almost like a comedy show, or it's like a football match. Like when he comes into the studio where the pig is, and they all cheer. It's like a football team coming out onto the pitch. Yeah. And then as it goes on,
it's horrible.
And they realise it's horrible, and they're horrible for having been enjoying it up to then.
It's again similarly. I suppose it was what it was commenting on there, I guess. And again, when I'm writing it, I try and just describe what I'm seeing in my head. So I imagine, and so the little trick I played on myself in order to write that was to imagine I was writing like an episode of 24. Right. Something like that, like a thriller, but with this ridiculous premise, but that I was going to take very seriously within it. And then as I carried on writing it, I thought, well, it's more interesting because I think if that was announced that was going to happen in the afternoon, live on television, people would tune in, and there would be places where people were tuning in going, well, Absolutely. Hey, and then the grim reality of what was going on, suddenly it's not fun anymore. Yeah. Again, weirdly, it was partly...
But it's also the thing about...
It's partly a relish to see people destroyed. There's often a delight
especially in politicians.
Especially politicians and celebrities to a lesser degree, but politicians, there is a real relish and delight in seeing them fail or be destroyed in some way. And I suppose it was,
even though that might damage us as people.
That's ultimately where we end up is
Brexit.
We did a thing. I'm not particular. I started doing, because I started out doing TV stuff. I started doing sort of TV review show. It was like it was only reviews of television. And then the only reason I started doing current affairs was because I felt profoundly ignorant of current affairs. And I sort of thought, we did one episode of the TV review thing that was about news, and it went down very well, and I felt like I learnt quite a bit. Yeah. And so we started focusing on it as in a desperate bid for me to understand the world, partly. So I'm quite politically ignorant. But it's interesting that we did a thing for the election. We did an election wipe special. And as part of that, I looked at a lot of sort of political interviews from throughout the ages. Yeah. And it was startling as interviewers became more aggressive and Paxman-esque, it becomes a strategic game where suddenly politicians cannot say anything, and you're watching a sort of sport. Yeah. You really are watching a game. Yeah. And so the interviewers and the politicians are locked in this weird loveless marriage where they're just sniping it. It's just horrible. Yeah. And little wonder the public starts getting alienated. Yeah. But it's also sort of our fault, I'm talking from the point of view of the viewer, in that it's delightful to watch Michael Howard being asked the same question again and again and again, and he can't answer it. It's like his discomfort is delicious. Yeah. Yes, but you end up with a scenario in which no one can talk straight.
But the other thing that was interesting with the pig is that, again, it becomes realistic because we do know that terrorists kidnap public figures and they do ask politicians to do things, and actually that side of it felt very, very real.
Did it? Was it it felt authentic?
Well, it felt like, the things that the advice was saying about the different ways of handling it and how you might try to, and the dilemma that you might face, and even the thing about the Queen phones you up and says, and it's a different order of thing if it's her rather than an aide.
Right.
That all felt,
Really?
I was quite locked into that, yeah.
Good, because like I remember, God, it was a while ago I was writing that, but I was really worried that this is just nonsense.
Well, it's ridiculous.
Yeah.
Because of the pig.
Mm-hmm. Oh yes,
it's not ridiculous.
But it felt authentic, as in terms of if it was a different threat. If it was
yeah.
Right. Okay.
And how do you deal with that? And what's the point come at which actually you do have to do what they're saying?
Right. God, it was total guesswork. So that's quite useful. I mean, when I did the Waldo moment, I did talk to Rupert a bit about what it's like being a politic, how a campaign might work.
But how do you know so much about technology? Because you don't research. Do you research trends? Do you look at the way that?
Not really. No, I don't tend to. I'm quite geeky, and so I used to be a video games journalist years ago, and I've always been fascinated by that side of things, and I've always been quite techie. I don't tend to. I mean, I read I read probably like anyone. I just sort of. And especially now that I'm doing this show, people alert me to, and like, just people on social media all the time. People saying, "Have you seen this? Have you seen that?"
Right.
So it goes in, but I don't. I try not to sort of actively research things weirdly, because it might get in the way of a story idea.
Yeah.
Really,
Yeah.
I'd like to try and keep it relatively simple. Once I've got the idea, I will then. We have a basic rule that usually the technology is fairly grounded in reality.
Have you ever had
Callister, it isn't really.
Have you ever had an idea and thought that's just too ridiculous? I can't do that.
Yeah, but then we went ahead and did it.
Which was?
We did one in the last season where there was people were being picked off one by sort of drone bees.
Yeah.
And I remember thinking this. I said several times during the writing process, "This is too silly."
Right.
And then it turns out that drone bees are a real thing.
Yeah.
So, what do I know?
Yeah. So there's no limit.
There's no limit.
Do you think you'll do this forever?
Certainly until it gets boring.
Boring for you or boring for?
Boring. Well, it probably.
I suppose if it's boring for you, it will get boring.
You'd hope it would get boring for everyone at the same time.
Right.
I think that it's certainly like. The one thing it's weird because the show has to refresh itself with every single episode. You don't ever really get that jaded.
Right.
Do you know what I mean? It's not like it's going to be like season 5.
How much of your time do you spend writing it?
Oh, writing it really varies actually, as in how quickly you can write episodes. Sometimes they take, I don't know, like 6 weeks.
Right.
And other times I've written my record is like 3 days or something like that
for a whole episode.
For a whole episode.
Which one was that?
I think White Bear, because it was although it was a rewrite, because as in I completely tore it up and came in with a completely new idea. But I tend to write quickly once I know what I'm doing.
Right.
It takes a while to think of the story, and then the actual script, I tend to write really quickly.
Right. And do you like working with Netflix?
Oh yeah, no, brilliant.
Because
they
shed loads of money.
Well, but that really does. That all that gets you is more freedom in terms of making the show, basically. So it just means that you are not having to boringly, and you still have to go through the script and go, well, we can't afford the hospital and the police station, so which one is it going to be?
I was surprised you told me earlier that Callister was filmed here rather than the US because it's cheaper.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. It was all shot in Twickenham. Yeah. And there's some alien planets which are Lanzarote.
Right.
But we've never shot in America. There's another. Jodie Foster has directed one for this season that was shot in Canada that's standing in for the US, and so because America's just too expensive.
Yeah. But America's is going big in America.
Yeah. No, we're pretty big in America in that we've become a. You know when something is breaking through when it becomes a phrase. So it becomes when Trump was elected, there were people walking around with placards going, "This episode of Black Mirror sucks," sort of thing. So at the point you start seeing that, you go, "Okay, we've broken through some sort of little. We're standing in for something in people's heads, and they're using us we've become a reference."
What do you think Netflix is doing to your trade industry more generally?
Personally, it's amazing in that you are not beholden. There's various things. One is they're giving a lot of creative freedom. I think generally there is a lot more creative freedom on television now than there was just even a few years ago.
Do you see Netflix as television?
Yes.
You see it the same way?
I do. I see it
Yeah.
as... that's probably just my antiquated way of looking at it. That's what I see it as. But I think generally on the small screen, there is a lot more freedom than there was even a few years ago. There was an appetite for it. That's taken the place of... If you look at cinema now, there's a lot of interesting films being made, but it feels like a lot of... In television, writers have a lot of power that you don't get elsewhere. Chances are being taken, and people are being encouraged to take risks because things need to stand out. And so that's interesting. And apart from and on top of that, because we're shifting very quickly to a model, even when you look at iPlayer as well, it's the same thing. The time slot in which you go out is less important. It's becoming immaterial, which is amazing news, because that was always a problem. Twofold. One, there could be a snooker match on the other side and no one tunes in and you're lost. Or you're forced to give away everything in advance so that people will know how to tune in, or you have to be a carnival bar.
So it's more creative. You can be more creative.
I guess it feels like you can. It also feels like you're not worrying about the moment the next day when the ratings come through, which no matter what they tell you is either good or can be incredibly disappointing.
So how many people are watching? How many people will watch
Black Mirror?
Yeah,
don't know, but I literally don't know how many actually. Netflix will know exactly. But
why won't they tell you?
Probably because maybe it would be depressing. I don't know. Because it doesn't matter to their. It doesn't matter to their.
But
model.
does it matter to you?
No, not really. I mean, because the thing is, I suppose I'm fairly confident that a lot of people are watching, because I can tell they are. Because you get a lot of feedback, and also because it's global. It's literally sort of every country except North Korea and China, I think, pretty much. Because it's global and instantaneous, you know that people are watching it. It's like, say, far more people will be watching it globally than we would be watching it if we were just on in the UK, for instance. So you have that sort of immediately, and also because it's always there, because it's sort of like those services are like having a magic cupboard in your house that's full of stuff. It's less important. Like, I got into Breaking Bad like 3 years after it started. The Wire, like 3 years after it started. All of those things, you can now come to things.
What are you watching now? What are you into at the moment?
What have I just watched? I've just finished watching Narcos season 3, which I very much enjoyed. I've been watching Dr. Foster, which is ridiculous, but like I've really enjoyed. I couldn't work out if I hated it or loved it. I sort of think it's like brilliantly fucking demented. It might as well take place on the fucking moon, but like I'm quite enjoying it. I just watched Big Little Lies, which I hadn't seen, which I enjoyed. What else? I mean, we tend to watch. We're like, oh, what are we going to watch? Because like anything, like with parents of young kids, so it's like, finally getting them to bed.
Is Connie working?
No, well, she's doing like a Penguin podcast and stuff like that. But a lot of the time she's been looking after the kids at the moment, which is like knackering for her. And then so I'll come in and I'm knackered. And what you want to watch is, my tastes have slightly changed. In that I used to like watching really nihilistic, horrible horror films, and now I kind of... I'm quite happy to watch Bake Off.
Oh, really?
My
getting old, man. Getting old.
Oh, yeah, I love like MasterChef.
Oh, God.
You should get into MasterChef.
No,
it's good. It's always the same. It's so comforting.
Listen, where does all this technology stuff go, do you think?
Where are we heading?
Yeah.
Well...
Do you feel optimistic about it?
Yeah, no and yes. In that no and yes. In that I think that where it has to head, if we're to have any kind of future, is we'll get used to it. I mean, how disruptive was the printing press when that came out? That completely transformed the world, but for the better.
Felt like it, looking back, it feels like it was for the better,
Yeah, probably at the time, it felt awful.
Threatening, yeah.
So you have to hope that, something that allows us to communicate more quickly and rapidly and freely with each other should ultimately be good for humankind. Or we'll end up in a scenario. It feels also like we're quite quickly heading to a scenario where we're going to have to rethink the entire world of work.
Yeah.
Because
robotics.
Well, as soon as all the trucks in America are self-driving, which is surely going to happen in 30 years. Within 30 years, you've got to. That's the entire workforce that's been.
Yeah.
What are you going to do? So the whole system is going to require a rethink.
And we can't all write TV series.
We can't all write TV series, and I could easily be replaced as well
By a robot.
By some sort of... who's to say that there won't be some new form of entertainment that's...
Algorithmic,
that's somewhere between a sort of VR environment and a emergent, like Grand Theft Auto style, as in sort of sandbox world that you run around in that people find more entertaining than...
Yeah.
Or that you'll be able to put a Black Mirror episode into an algorithm and it will pump out another one that's better,
without you getting any
without
money for
me
it.
getting paid, or even I'd be destroyed straight away. I'd be melted down and cooked and eaten, and then it could just keep going. So,
what's your biggest fear at 3 a.m?
It's horrible. Well, it's society breaks down into a terrible World War II style horrible fight for survival, in which I have to flee with my family, probably.
Do you survive?
No, that would. Well,
do you die a horrible death?
You die, or your children are taken away. You can't look after your own kids, and the world careers into a horrible chasm of terror.
Does Connie have these fears?
No, she's much more optimistic than me.
Right.
I mean, I can go there quite quickly. When I did an end of year show last year, 2016, White,
yeah,
and the process of doing that, I was quite fragile for a couple of weeks after that. Genuinely, just very afraid for the world and for almost immediate safety of my. I was almost looking around, thinking, where in the world would we flee to if this? So I can go there quite rapidly.
Do you get paranoid more generally? Do you ever feel paranoid?
Yes, I do. I am. I'm totally. If you put me in any, if I go to the cinema, I expect someone to come in and start shooting people. For instance, I have done for years. That's not a recent thing.
Yeah.
That's something I've thought about for years. I often think, if I'm somewhere? I was in a hospital a few years ago. One of our kids was in hospital overnight, and I remember at one point, and I was sleeping there, next to the bed. It all turned out fine, but at some point I heard this noise. I was like, I heard like a police siren or something. It was, any normal person would have known immediately that was somebody watching a television. It was like a film on a television. Yeah. I immediately assumed that the hospital was under attack,
right.
And that terrorists were roaming the building and killing people, which isn't that.
Yeah.
But I immediately go there.
And does it feel real?
Yeah.
And how long does that last?
Until I reassure myself that it's not real.
Right.
So I have to check. I mean, I'm the person who has to go and go all the way home to check that I didn't leave the door unlocked, and
right.
And if I hear a noise in the middle of the night, that's a burglar breaking in to kill me. And if one of the kids has a temperature, it's going.
You put that gun away. No.
Oh my God! What is? You see that? Even that's quite threatening. If somebody has a temperature, it's going to be fatal. I'm that.
But it's not technology that's made you like that, because you've always been like that.
I've always been like that. I don't quite know why.
Is that where your creativity comes from?
Possibly, in that certainly I am predisposed to always imagine and picture the worst case scenario in any situation. So which is really useful when it comes to coming up with Black Mirror storylines.
Yeah, sure.
Because you go, well, what if there was an invention that did this? And I go, yeah, but then this would happen.
Right.
Oh. I don't know what. I immediately think that there's a kettle there. I immediately would worry that would knock over and scald someone. And, so I immediately go there. I once heard there was one of the members of Orbital. This always stuck in my head randomly. I was reading an interview years ago in the NME, and one of the guys in Orbital was being interviewed, and he said, "My problem is I've got an Alfred Hitchcock mind, in that I can't look at anything without thinking that something terrible will happen, which is what happens a lot in Alfred Hitchcock films.
Yeah.
There's a whole sequence in The Birds where, where they're all looking out and there's a guy filling his car with petrol, and it's tense and horrible because you know something awful is going to happen, but you don't know what. I feel like that a lot of the time. I remember him saying in his interview he couldn't look at a park railing without going, oh, what if you slipped and your hand went on that and it would... And that's me. I can't... if I'm at the airport and I'm about to get on the plane, I look round at the other passengers and it's like, who's gonna go? Who's
got the bomb?
Who's gonna or it's either who's got the bomb or it's who's going to freak out and open the exit door. It's like because a bomb would be too obvious. Do you know what I mean? It's like who's going to? Yeah. I do remember seeing a guy being at an airport not that long ago, and there was a guy a couple of years ago. This was, and there was a guy started assembling a device. And he seemed to be doing it quite furtively and anxiously. He was like, had this sort of little metal thing, and then he got this thing, and it was a little vial of liquid. And I was like, I've got to fucking report this. What the fuck? And then I suddenly realised he was vaping. It was like,
right.
I'd not really seen, it was one of those electric cigarettes that looks a bit like the back end of a lightsaber or something. And I was like, fuck for that, because immediately I thought this is something out of 24. What the fuck is it? A top nerve gas? What's he about to do? I don't know where that comes from. Weirdly, when I've been in situations that are potentially terrifying, I'm oddly slightly calm.
Like what?
Well, so in 1992, was it? Something like that. I was a student at the Polytechnic of Central London, what became University of Westminster, but I was on a bus. I was on a 159 bus going which was going towards sort of Oxford Circus way, and it was going up like Whitehall, and it was the morning. It was a really snowy, cold day, and I had earplugs in. I was listening to really loud, like gangster rap, and suddenly the bus stops, and there's a weird smell, and somebody starts shouting, "Oh, nerve gas! Nerve gas!" That's what's reminded me of it, was the vaping thing. Nerve gas! Gas attack! That's right, it was the time of the first Gulf War, and there had been rumours that Saddam Hussein was going to nerve gas the tube. And in front of the bus there's a van sort of on fire, basically, or there's like fire. This is my memory of it, there was fire. And then there's police running everywhere, and I'm like, what the... It was the IRA had fired
the water bomb. Yeah, I remember that.
At Downing Street, which should be a terrifying...
So you were chilled?
Well, I just sort of thought, I'm going to be in real trouble because I was late that morning. I was like, I'm going to... Oh, no. How am I going to fucking get to Oxford Circus now? Oh, God. And I had to sort of walk all the way around. And it was snowy and slippery. I had to walk all the way around St James's Park or somewhere. And I was really pissed off. And I wasn't really thinking... And when I got to where I said, I got held up, it was... I don't know what it was... And people were like, oh my God, that must have been terrifying. And I sort of thought, oh yeah.
So the real world doesn't scare you, it's stuff in your head.
I dare say, if anything, I do not know that I'd actually react calmly in a. I mean, the threat seemed to have ended at the point where I suddenly realised what was going on. So, I'm very lucky. I'm not really, I haven't really been in a physical fight or anything like that. I've had people try and start on me in a pub and stuff like that, but no, I'm a terrible physical coward.
Right.
Yeah.
Oh, what are you for?
What am I for?
Yeah.
I don't know. I think that it depends. I'm wearing two hats. So if I'm doing Black Mirror, I'm kind of hopefully mainly I'm trying to be a campfire storyteller. Yeah. So it's sort of entertaining. And hopefully I think there's something oddly reassuring about things that aren't reassuring. Satire, I think, and comedy at the moment, I think there is something to be said for now, with the state that the world is in. I think there's something to be said for pointing out the madness of it. So I'm thinking about this when we do our end of year show later in the year. Pointing out the madness of things is reassuring to people because you think other people are noticing this and feeling the same way. Because I do remember, just rewinding back to in the 80s when I was terrified of nuclear war, that you'd watch Spitting Image or something like that, and it would be chilling and frightening sometimes. They did that whole sketch. And you would think, thank fuck, someone else out there is feeling like this is a madhouse. There's something about that helps, I think, your general level of anxiety or your general level of sanity in a way. It's good to know that other people are scared as well, if you see what I mean. So in a weird way, I suppose I see the
You're there
task
to
as
share fear.
reassuring by worrying out loud.
Do you switch your phone off at night?
As in, why? Because I think it will give me brain cancer.
No, when you go to bed, do you just turn it off?
So it won't distract me?
Yeah. Do you switch it off at night when you go to bed?
No, because I'm usually listening to like something
on your phone. Okay, right.
But I do put it on like airplane mode,
right,
so that I won't get, because I don't like the fact that it will wake you up with, something awful.
Right.
Because that's happened a lot. That happened with Trump. You sort of
what?
Yeah. So I don't like the fact that it intervenes and elbows you in the ribs unannounced.
All right, okay, Charlie.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Enjoyed it.
Snap. Oh, I'm off.
Yeah,
out,
you're off.
am I?
You're leading
Okay.
the way.
I'm going this way.
Brilliant.
Cool. Whew.